And thank you for attending this month's webinar, which you can see is concerning Section 413, which is control of records, and hit on some aspects on when a record is actually required. My name is Mike Kramer. I am the Calibration Program Manager at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, and this will follow the normal protocol that we've used in the past. I will got a presentation prepared. We'll go through that. At the end of the presentation, you should have a space on your screen where you can type in and ask questions. Being assisted by Tracy Sorensen, our president at PJI headquarters, and she will funnel those questions to myself at the end. So without further ado, this is a relatively short presentation. There's a lot of information in here. It's scheduled to go from 1 to 2. I don't anticipate it going that long, but then again, we might get a lot of questions. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and begin the presentation. Again, thank you all for logging in and joining us. So one thing I want to start out with, and this is more prevalent for new accreditations, I've come across this, is the differences between a document and a record. Document control, that's captured in 4.3, and records is captured in 4.13. So there's two separate sections of the 17025 standards that address these. So we're going to look at some of the basic differences here. It's not all inclusive, but some of the big ones is that a document are actually created when something is to be done. Well, a record is created when something is done. Excuse me. Documents can change and records don't change. So a document, if you think back to doc control, you have a master list, you have revisions that can be updated and changed, and you need to control those, and they change. A record, once you make a record, it's a snapshot in that point of time, and that's not supposed to change. Again, documents tell you how to do something. Example, your work instructions, your SOPs that you follow, that's documented. Within those documents, you may be specifying specific records. So that's what that last bulletin items are. Is records are created by plan. So quite often your document may specify records, and that's what we're presenting here today. When I explain this, when I'm doing an assessment or initially, I like to refer to records as once the pen meets the paper, it becomes a record. So hence you may have a form. Let's say, for example, you may have a corrective action form. That's a document. You may change the format of the form, but the actual form is a document itself. Once you start, in this particular example, corrective action, you initiate a corrective action, you start, then you start making a specific record. So once again, when the pen meets the paper, or of course in this day and age, it's can be more prevalent to refer to that as the electronic equivalent. Okay, got some examples of documents here. Some of the ones that come to mind is, of course, your quality manual, your quality and technical procedures, external documents that you adopt, that you're bringing from the outside in, your forms, as we stated, certificate reports, templates, and data sheets. And actually, we're revisiting Section 4.3 here for a moment. There's actually a note within that section that specifies in this content, documents could be policy statements, procedures, specifications, calibration tables, charts, textbooks, posters, notices, memorandums, software, drawings, plans, etc. This may be on various media, whether hard copy or electronic, and they may be digital, analog, photographic, or written. So basically, if any of those mentioned or utilized within your quality management system, they will be considered as documents. Records, directly related to 413. Some of examples of records, again, once the pen meets the paper, meeting minutes, customer reports, a purchase order, completed data sheets, intermediate checks you may have in place. Again, complaints, you would create a record. Audit results, you do your internal audit. Say you're doing it to fulfill the annual requirement that you have within your QMS, Quality Management System, and to comply with 17025, the actual internal audit is considered a record. Corrective and preventive action, management reviews, completed customer surveys, contracts, control graphs. All those would be considered records and would come under the realm of Section 4.13, Control of Records. So basically, when is a record required? The standard 17025, and this is one of the first things we speak about when we go over an overview of the standard, is that word shall. So there's specific instances within the standards where it incorporates records. I have listed a few examples that I've taken out of 17025, and we have two words used in conjunction with each other. You have shall and be recorded, or a record needs to be created. The first one, 413.3, this is what we're just talking about, internal audits. Hence, a record shall be made and needs to be recorded. 415.2 is an example taken out of your management reviews. Finding from management reviews and the actions that arise from them shall be recorded. 525, we're getting into the technical aspects here. This is in regards to personnel. The laboratory shall maintain records of the relevant authorizations, competence, education, professional qualifications, training, skills, and experience of all technical personnel, including contractor personnel. A record that is always should be looked for is this information shall be readily available and shall include the date in which authorization or competence is confirmed. That date needs to be recorded. So jumping into 413, we're going to look at the requirements as specified within the standard. Start out with 413.1.1. A lot of information here. A relatively short sentence. A laboratory shall establish and maintain procedures for identification, collecting, indexing, accessing, filing, storage, maintenance, and disposal of quality and technical records. Quality records shall include reports from internal audits and management reviews, as well as the records of corrective and preventive action. So there you have the word shall there, so you need to maintain a procedure, and your procedure should address all these various elements. See this captured, could be within each individual procedure. I've seen this captured actually on a some sort of matrix where each record, sort of like a master documents list that you see in document controls, where I've seen organizations handle records in the same format. However, this is to be addressed. 413.1.1, you need to be able to establish procedures and address all these elements. One thing that's interesting is even the disposal. So if you're maintaining hard records, you're going to have retention time. At the end of that retention time, these are normally minimal. The method of disposal needs to be addressed, i.e. Sent off offsite to storage, shred it, or two of the most common methods that I typically would see to address that requirement. And again, the standard is tells you, you may refer to it within your quality system where you specify what you're going to do. Of course, when you're being assessed, if you're doing your internal audits, that is verified through the audit product that you're actually doing what you say you're going to do. Another thing that's of interest here is records are within 17025. You have technical records and you have quality records. So it specifically spells out some quality records that shall be included. Internal audits, management reviews, and records from your corrective and preventive action. All right, 413.1.2, and this is something that when I'm thinking of auditing or assessing, part of audit criteria is things that you actually see or hear. So quite often, I have a picture there of a fellow that's trying to retrieve a document. So let's look at what the requirement states. All records shall be legibly and shall be stored and retained in such a way that they are readily retrievable in facilities that provide a suitable environment to prevent damage or deterioration or to prevent loss. Again, retention times of records shall be established. So note within the standard, the records don't, of course, in this day of age, you see more and more electronic records. Records may be in any media, such as hard copies or electronic copies. Again, this is something that you actually would see firsthand and take it into account as audit criteria. So, for example, readily retrievable, if I'm doing an assessment and I ask to see a record, and I generally expect to see it rather quickly. If an individual leaves the room and it's 15-20 minutes, I'm looking at my watch, I'm thinking that retrievable part may not be in place in that facility. Suitable environment, that's you know, of course they're not going to be damaged, the weather's not going to affect them. Deterioration and to prevent loss. So again, once again, the retention time shall be established. They should be readily available. And need to be in a suitable environment. A lot of that, it's pretty straightforward there. All records shall be held secure and in confidence. 413.1.3. So your records, they should not be stored in a place where outside of the realm of your quality management system, and preferably within control of the laboratory. Again, these are things that I actually would see, or you would actually see within your laboratory. If, for example, if records are kept at a loading dock area and unlocked filing cabinets where anybody, UPS person, delivery person would have access to them, that would be objective evidence in that this particular requirement is not being met. Typically, like to see them stored in a location where access is controlled, and this is going through the extreme here with the filing cabinet with all the padlocks on it, but ideally should be secure, locked, and only those that need access or require access would have the access to the records. And 413.1.4, we're going to address this same scenario, but the electronic version of records. The laboratory shall have procedures to protect and back up records stored electronically and to prevent access or to make any amendment to these records. Again, records are created electronically. Quite often these days you see them on a server. They're going into cyber world somewhere, and we're looking for these records to be protected, i.e. backed up and protected. And then again, you have to prevent unauthorized access to them. I have some common examples at the bottom of the slide there. Saving records as read-only or password protection or popular usage of tools I see in place to prevent unauthorized access. If you have field technicians, I do calibration assessments where the work is being performed, for example, on-site at the customer's location, and I may see a technician with a laptop there. Something that I would question. A technician may be actually creating records there on-site, may actually be producing a calibration report. So you should look at your off-site operations as well. They may be tied in directly to the server, but if not, you need to have a procedure in place. And another part of my past employment, I had a situation where a technician actually had his hard drive crash and lost a couple weeks worth of records there. Forced my arm to solidify a procedure for having those things loaded into a place in cyber world. In this particular instance, it was a server, and it was hence backed up by the office there, but specific instructions for the technician to ensure that was being done. So again, we talked within the realms of records, the quality records and the technical records. The technical records, these are things that you are recording and making records of that actually is going to be incorporated into the final product of what you're producing, which is your calibration or test reports. So for 413.2.1, we start looking at technical records specifically. Go ahead and read this. The laboratory shall retain records of original observations, derived data, and sufficient information to establish an audit trail. Calibration records, staff records, and a copy of each test report or calibration certificate issued for a defined period. The records of each test or calibration shall contain sufficient information to facilitate, if possible, identification of factors affecting the uncertainty and to enable the test or calibration to be repeated under conditions as close as possible to the original. The record shall include the identity of the personnel responsible for the sampling, performance of each test or calibration, and checking of results. A whole lot of information there, and we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail here, but basically, when you're doing a test or calibration, you need to be able to collect enough, you need to be able to retain enough records where if need be, you can go back and repeat the test or calibration. Section 510, reporting the results. That's address a lot of these, and a lot of these may actually be captured on your calibration or test report. Have a couple notes in regards to that. Note number one, I've never actually seen this. I'm assuming there's probably some testing areas where this may be prevalent. In certain fields, it may be impossible or impractical to retain records of all observations. Note 2, technical records and accumulations of data, and it refers to section 547, which I referenced at the back. That is the control of data within section 5.4, testing and calibration methods and method validation, and I recorded that requirement at the bottom there. So again, technical records and accumulation of data and information which results from carrying out testing or calibrations which indicate whether specific quality or process parameters are achieved. They may include forms, contracts, worksheets, workbooks, check sheets, work notes, control graphs, external and internal test reports, and calibration certificates, customers' notes, papers, and feedback. So any of these things that were collected during the realm of performing a test or calibration would need to be maintained, and if need be, could be revisited, and the parameters, the standards, the individual, perhaps even the environmental conditions that were associated with the testing calibrations were captured. Okay, 413.2.2. Observations, data, and calculations shall be recorded at the time they are made and shall be identifiable to specific tasks. In other words, when you're collecting data for your testing calibration, it should be done in real time. Makes sense. It's not something you don't want to forget. The sooner it gets entered into the spreadsheet or the data form that you're using, the better. You don't want to jot it down on a piece of paper that could get lost and entered an hour or two later. So the folks that wrote the standards to put this in here for that specific reason. When you collect these data, that needs to be done in real time. All right, addresses records. 413.2.3 addresses when a record does need to be changed and what needs to happen. When mistakes occur in records, each mistake shall be crossed out, not erased, made illegible, or deleted, and the correct value entered alongside. All such alterations to records shall be signed or initialed by the person making the correction. In the case of records stored electronically, equivalent measures shall be taken to avoid loss or change of original data. So handwritten records, for example, if you are performing a test or calibration, and let's say you have a logbook that's associated with, let's say, an analytical balance where you have test weights, Class 1 test weights that you use to check the balance, and you have predefined limits set where you'll qualify the equipment in use. Quite often I'll still see those things hand recorded. If you make a mistake, or if during the review of the certificate, the data sheet, if there's a lot of erasing, well, that's prohibited, but scribbled items being crossed out without the audit trail being followed, which specifies the date and initial of the person who made the changes, that is subjected to a non-conformance. And again, that's something that's seen. I've actually seen it done while witnessing a calibration where a mistake was made. I saw the individual just scribble through and write the correct answer, and right away pointed to this area of the standard, went back and looked, and I've seen it as a reoccurring issue. So it's just something you need to be made aware of, that you are creating a record. And again, these actions need to be taken for handwritten records. Going to look at electronic records now. Same concept, but the records that are being done electronically. They say, for example, in the balance situation, you are entering directly into a spreadsheet prior to proceeding with the test or calibration. To ensure against the loss or change of original data that is stored electronically, audit trails are used so as not to obscure the original observations. Audit trails provide a history of the data from original observation to final value. This incorporates not allowed removal of data entered. Same as the handwritten principle, but in a more sophisticated manner being done electronically. Some examples I've listed here are actually there are software tools that retain all versions and history and identification when and by whom the new versions were saved. If you're utilizing software and its status compliant with 17025 requirements, it should be accounting for this. Other tools are tools that force the user to save as a data file, therefore creating unique file names of each instant or revision or change. Got two other items listed here, which by the standard they are prohibited. Not prohibited. They are allowed in order to meet the requirement. Retaining a register of changes or revision in electronic records that detail the changes made and by whom. And last but not least, track changes in Microsoft Word in a combination with removing the modify permission in the file. That can also be used if a change of a record needs to be made. Okay, that is the end of the presentation. Like I said, it was kind of short there. There was a lot of information there. This time now will be allocated towards submitting questions. We will provide a 5-minute time frame from this moment. So if you have a question that comes to mind, please submit it. It will be relayed to me, and I will revisit these questions in about 5 minutes. So at the end, we will attempt to answer as many as possible, and I should have sufficient time this afternoon. And if for whatever reason your question remains unanswered, or if this evening question comes to mind, feel free to submit the question directly to the webinar at pjlabs.com. So we will allow about 5 minutes now for questions. So again, you should have on your screen a tool for submitting questions. Welcome back, and thank you. I have received a series of questions, some very good questions, and bear with me. I'm actually using my phone to retrieve these messages. So I'll go through these. I'll answer. I should be able to get through them all. Question number 1: when is test data required for customers? Does every piece of equipment calibrated need test data created or stored, or only when the customer requests the data, especially when our calibration certificates claim that we are following 17025 requirements? Basically, what you need to report to your customers is specified in Section 510, reporting the results. And in order for a calibration report or test report to be compliant with 17025, it needs to meet those requirements. I'm not sure I'm really clear on the question of does every piece of equipment calibrated need test data? Well, in the realm of Section 510, you are required to report the actual calibration results, including the units of measures. Unit of measure. There is a loophole for simplified reporting. So if your customers does not require an element within Section 510, they need to specify that in writing. Again, if it's pertinent to the actual results of the test or calibration, even if it's not on the calibration or test report, you need to be able to go back and reproduce the test or calibration. And if it is a significant factor, particularly in uncertainty calculations for calibration labs, then yes, it does need to, you need to have a record of it. I hope I answered that question. I wasn't real exactly clear on that. If not, feel free to email it and state a specific example, and perhaps I could clarify that a little bit more. Question number 2, does an instrument record for a test needs to include a specific reference to the test method? Again, that is captured in 510. That is a requirement that the test method needs to be captured. And of course, in order to reproduce the test or calibration, that should be captured. Question number 3, are there any expected changes recording records and the information in this webinar in the upcoming release of 17025? I would expect so. If it falls within the realm of some of the other standards that have been recently revised, I expect some changes in that area. Can't really be specific at this point unless until it becomes a new revised version of 17025. I can speak on behalf of 9001. Recently completed a course on the 9001 new 2015 version. It's my first exposure to the to that standard. There was several individuals that were used to dealing with 2008, and apparently there's been significant changes in records and documents. Retain and maintain procedures is what they're referred to. So I fully expect some changes in that area. Bear with me, let me get to the next series of questions. If I am making observations of equipment being calibrated and is in the process of controlling the set of values, is this considered a part of the record? If you're watching if it's actually a calibration that a company is performing on your equipment, then of course that needs to be maintained. What I think is being referred to here is perhaps that example I was referring to as equipment checks with the balance, for example. And that would need to be be captured because you're looking for it to operate between predefined criteria. Hence, that needs to be captured, and if need be looked at to repeat the test or calibration, and that would be an aspect to determine whether or not the equipment was actually in controlled and checked and did not exceed any predefined criteria. Bear with me to get to the next series of questions. This one states, if you are using a Weber standard reference bar, I'm not really familiar with that standard, for calibration of position, and you write down an incorrect number and immediately make a correction, does that make it it does not make it unreasonable? Does it apply? I would say yes, within the realm of what the standard states, and follow it to the T. If you need to make a correction, I'm assuming this is a on a data sheet that the protocol for crossing out, dating, and initial would apply. That would be my my initial thought on that, because it does state on the question if you write it down. All right, I'm going to see if there's any more here. Okay, well that's the list of the questions I received. I hope I answered them directly. If there's any doubt or if I was off base of the specifics of what you were asking, feel free to email at that address there. That brings us to the close of this month's webinar. And again, thank you all for signing in. I want to take a look into May, and we have a good one set up here. You're not going to want to miss this. This is set up for the 10th of May, same time, same station. And the topic is proficiency testing, and this is an area that we find, especially for new accreditations, that laboratories will sometimes struggle with. And at PJLA, we have, like your other accrediting bodies, we have specific requirements that laboratories need to follow and comply with in regards to proficiency testing. So we're going to look at approved methods of proficiency testing. We're going to look at interlab, intralab, what you need to do if perhaps third party or interlab is not feasible. And then comparisons. That's something that's very important, especially if you're doing an interlab or an intralab. Great, you performed the test or calibration, and you may be working with another lab where you're going to compare the data. You need to be able to compare them in a meaningful way, and what constitutes a successful comparison between Lab A and Lab B. So again, that's May the 10th. And if you have a chance on our website prior to the assessment, and if you're already accredited with us, you should have it in your control documents list. PL1, that's PJLA's policy on proficiency testing. Again, thank you all for signing in, and we look forward to speaking to you again next month. And feel free to continue to send in those questions, and I'll be happy to respond. Thank you.